step 5 of Operation Magician. In this video, we're going to be looking at the step that's called use what's already there, adapt and flow. So for this, you have to remember that as an archetypal magician, you have to be able to shapeshift, adapt, use disguises, use pseudonames, even if necessary, right? Um, but at the same time, this type of internal towards the external shapeshift could also happen backwards. That is, you can base yourself on the context, on the external, to change your internal, to change yourself, right? So this is very key with observation. You need to be able to observe the environment and detect what things you can and can't do and adapt yourself to the environment, right? So you're going to adapt, and once you adapt, kind of like sting like a butterfly, float like a sting like a bee, float like a butterfly. In this case, you will be able to float like a butterfly, right? So then you can sting like a bee. So you need to become, there's this ancient idea of you need to become like water, right? Like if you pour water in a cup, it takes the shape of a cup. If you pour water in a different type of container, it takes the shape of that container, right? So it's more or less the same idea. So this step has a lot to do with observation. You need to observe. You need to see what's going on. You need to do this so you can learn how to spot the implicit and natural rules that are already taking place. Now, this would be key if you're in a different culture, but we don't have to extend that far out. There are different subcultures, mini cultures, micro cultures within different groups of people within your own community, right? So it's just noticing what their values are, what motivates them, right? What they talk about, and adapting yourself to that, right? Now, again, this could come off as fake, but that's why you got to practice it. You have to learn the implicit and natural rules that are out there. And once you learn them, you have two options. And these two options are going to depend on where you want to take it from here. The first option is to make those rules explicit, right? So they say a lot of people aren't aware of their cultural biases or what they believe in because it's so deep rooted in their subconscious, it's so automatic for them that they're not aware of it. So if you make it explicit, right, if you make those cultural norms or those group rules explicit, that may create a self-conscious attitude in the people, and the people may become, weirded out by that. But if that's the effect you want to ultimately cause for them to reflect and think about their behavior as a group, it depends. You could get them either angry at you, you can get them angry at themselves, you can probably get them to reflect and maybe even modify their attitude and behaviors. Or once you detect these natural implicit rules and attitudes and behaviors and motivations within the groups or within a person even, you can modify them, right, in the eyes of the rest to your advantage. So in this case, you're going to flow. You're going to basically redirect the person or the group in the way you want them to go, right? So if it's kind of like sequential, right? If you notice that they're already doing this, then the next thing, it may even be as natural as just pushing them, as the Joker said, like all they need is a little push, just pushing them to what they're already going to do next, right? A lot of it has to do with the idea of sequential things. So like, I don't have examples right now, but I remember something along the lines of, if you have a person that or a group of people that believe something, right? You can tell them something, right, first, and then something second, so it has like that effect on them, right? Or sometimes it doesn't even have to be that explicit, but if you talk, for example, this is just an idea I thought about. If you talk, and this ties together with the commitment principle by Robert Cialdini in his Persuasion book. If you talk about, I don't know, oh yeah, people are suffering because they're not being fed. People in Africa are starving, they're dying from hunger. and you just put that idea into their heads, right? It's called an anchoring idea. This is the same thing they do with prices. And then after that, you give them the opportunity to help someone in need, right? Like you say, oh, we're going to go to some communities to give food out to hospitals, right? To people that are outside of the hospitals or that are at the hospitals, waiting for family members or whatever. Do you want to come? Right? So now that person has to be consistent, right? And the way in which you order things, right? Because if you did it the other way around, it wouldn't create the same effect on the person, right? If you first ask them, out of the blue, like, hey, do you want to come and help out, feed the hungry? And then after that, you tell them about starving kids in Africa or something, it's not going to have the same effect, right? So it's the way in which you do things that you need to consider. Now, there's this idea in psychology which is very interesting. It's called sublimation. So these are Anna Freud, who is the daughter of Sigmund Freud, was the daughter of Sigmund Freud, and she came up with these repression techniques that subconsciously we do, right? So this is to avoid the anxiety or the bad emotions that come with letting ourselves know the bad things we have inside or we carry inside, right? So sublimation, as well as all of the other defense mechanisms, they're called defense mechanisms. Sublimation is basically doing something negative or that could be seen as negative through good means, right? Or through productive means, right? So this is to fulfill your own needs, because we are magicians, but at the end of the day, we also have needs, right? So you can try to adapt yourself, even within yourself, to these type of different scenarios and these type of different impulses and needs that you may have, right? Like try to find a way to make your needs and your impulses, right? Like your animal instincts and the negativity you have inside, try to make it work for you, try to make it work for other people, right? And yeah, learn to express a new terrain through different means, right? So this is the integration of the shadow. So there's more than one way of doing things, right? There are more than two ways of doing things, right? There are more than three ways of doing things, right? So a lot of this, again, it's very mentally exhausting, but you only required to do it under extreme circumstances, right? Or basically when you really need someone else to change or a group to change. Now, conflict. I want to talk a little bit about conflict. Conflict, there's been some texts that have actually talked about conflict as a good thing. I think there are managers and bosses that even cultivate some conflict in the company. Conflict is very interesting because it gets people out of the rut. It gets people out of the mechanical, monotonous life that they tend to have, even at work, right? So if you create conflict, just like a healthy dose of conflict, it's going to create change, innovation, right? Creativity, all of these good things that a lot of us like to do. I mean, just look at the world. It's filled, and look at history. It's filled with conflict. It's like humans have an obsession with conflict. We can't live peacefully with each other, right? But you can use conflict as a weapon. Like, use it consciously, right? Don't just be passive about it and all of a sudden you have conflict with people right out of the blue. Like, see where things are taking you, right? This is again that sequential order. Try to guess 2, 3 steps, 4, 5, 6 steps ahead what could potentially lead to a conflict, right? Now, conflict could be used in your benefit, either to change the way people view you if you're the one starting the conflict, right? So in this case, when a person starts a conflict, what do people tend to do? They tend to now approach you and treat you differently, right? They say, oh, that person gets angry. That person always has a conflict or always has a problem when people do this. So now they'll be worried. They'll be careful. Of course, there'll be people that will probably want to get revenge or get even. But that's where you have to balance the pros and the cons, right? Like, is it worth it? Is it the right move, right? Or you could use conflict to generate hostilities between or among third parties if you want, right? So this could be with, I don't know, someone overhearing you talk about something, right? And then, kind of like planting those seeds in the other person's heads or in the other person's minds, right? And that way, but again, it depends if it's to your benefit, right? If you see that people are coming to get you for whatever reason, the old saying goes, conquer and divide, right? So if you conquer, you make people, divide amongst themselves. They'll be easier, and sometimes you may not even have to interfere because they'll destroy each other. Because again, that human obsession with conflict, right? We just tend to not get along because of maybe Tony Robbins' second necessity, human necessity that he says we have, right? We want that diversity. Um, Now, this next point says give your preferred choice to something, but risk it by putting it along with other options and letting the other person think they have the control. Now, this goes back to an idea on Robert Greene's book, The Art of Seduction. And I think it's the idea, it's towards the end of the book. I just recently read this part. Trying to make the pursuer pursued, and that's for you, right? It's to create an illusion. So you're the seductor, but you want that person to think that they are seducing you, right? You want them to chase you, right? Now, this is a way of basically getting people, because even the most passive people want to have control, some level of control and autonomy, and you need to let them feel that. So the way in which you do that is it kind of goes back to this idea of the parent with the child, and instead of telling them like you need to eat your vegetables, or no vegetables, no dessert, like letting them think they have an option, like, okay, do you want 5 pieces of broccoli or 3, right? Maybe the child will say 3. So they think they have control, but you're really the one setting the stage, right? Setting up the situation. So you give them your preferred choice, right? You say, okay, I want to do, instead of A, B, C, I want to do D. Let's do D. But you risk it, right? You say, okay, now, and you can do this with like a common theme. Like it doesn't matter if we do A, B, C, or D, as long as we do this, right? As long as whatever needs to happen to get A, B, C, D done, we do that, right? And in a way, this is kind of like letting the other person know that they have a choice, right? But you've also thrown in your option, right? And if they care enough about you, they'll probably opt for your option, or they'll choose your option. And it's a good way of kind of giving them control. Now you risk it because you are saying, I'm okay with A, B, C, even though you may not be. You really want D, but you have to risk it like that. You have to put yourself out there, right? Because in Robert Greene's chapter, he talks about how you're going to basically like throw hints at the person, but the person, you have to let that person take control, right? And they may not, right? If they're just not that seduced by you, that interested in you, they may not take control, right? So you do risk it. If you say A, B, C, D, and I really want D, but we have to do this common thing, whatever we choose, the person may choose A or B or C, and you may not like it. So you are risking it. But I think there's something seductive about that risk, right? Which is letting the other person know that they have control. You're not choosing for them, right? And but at the same time, you kind of are, because you're planning that idea and you're kind of like broadening it, right? So I don't know if that works on a deeper psychological level. It probably does, but at the end of the day, you create that illusion. Now the last point I want to talk about in this adapt and flow step is something incredible by Sugata Mitra. Now Sugata Mitra is an investigator. He has a TED talk called A Hole in the Wall. And he basically talks about how to reform education in the 21st century, because he says the education system is not broken, it's just obsolete. It was made for the British Empire way back a couple hundred years ago. But now we need to come up with a new way of educating children, right? And really we have to look at the way in which we are going to educate people, right? Like, what is the intention of education, right? We may not even need schools anymore or education, because we have technology nowadays, internet access. So the way in which he guides his students, because after all, Operation Magician, or the magician archetype, is a teacher, right? It's like the wise guy, but putting the knowledge to practice and sharing that knowledge and transforming other people through the knowledge. So the way in which he guides his students is with explosive or guided questions, right? Like I just saw recently his new TED Talk where he talks about how he wants children to explore something related to cells or genetic cells or something like that, like a complicated topic. And he'll start with like a curious question, right? Like he'll say, how come men have beards and women don't? Right? And he'll just say that and he'll leave and he'll let the students, you know, with a computer and internet access and books around or whatever, he'll let them explore and discover that on their own, right? So that's huge, because you do need to let the person come to their own conclusions on their own, right? But you're there kind of guiding. So yeah, you guide these people with questions, right? And ask explosive or guided questions for people to have the answers, right? After all, you are teaching them, so they're gonna have the answers. They need to feel like they're reaching their own conclusions, because at the end of the day, you're not, you know, with brute force, direct or physical force going to change them, right? You're doing it in more subtle ways, more magician ways, right? Not like the rebel, or the rebel doesn't even, well, he does transform the rebel archetype, but the magician archetype is subtle, right? So you do have to kind of like, and questions are powerful, right? Because I forget who was saying, I think it was Sugata Mitra who was saying, like, you know, you guide them through questions, right? Like you can make people think about different things with questions, right? You don't even have to tell them something, like make them do the work, make them think. You have the answer, right? Or you have your perspective, but if you want them to have that same perspective, I think in a way it's better to guide them, right? It's kind of like what a therapist does, a psychologist with his patient, right? He'll kind of guide them through the question, and maybe the psychologist has the idea down, but he's not just going to come out and say it. He wants you to discover it, because it's more powerful when the person is able to feel like they have control, like they're making that transformation, right? And you're adapting to that person at the same time, right? It goes back to Carl Jung saying, you know, when two people come together, there is a mixture, right? There's a reciprocal mixture of like, you change me, I change you, right? We modify each other. So the magician is also learning through that interaction, right? The magician is learning to adapt, to flow, right? And at the end of the day, the person needs to feel like they are the ones that have made that transformation, that self-image transformation, right? And then they go with the consistency principle from Robert Cialdini, and they effectuate effectively, or they begin to execute efficiently their change, right? So that's step 5. Use what's already there, adapt and flow. I hope you enjoyed this video. Next step, we're going to be talking about identify with the people and look for common ground. This is kind of related to what we already saw in step 2, but we're going to go at it at a deeper angle. So be on the lookout for that video, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for staying. Bye.